Jewish revolt ended in a great defeat. But that wasn't clear from the start. When Greeks in Caesarea brought sacrifices right outside of the shul, as Josephus tells us, riots erupted. They spread throughout the country, put down harshly by the Romans, reaction, counter-reaction. The Roman procurators stole 17 talents of gold from the temple itself, enraging the Jewish population. The Jews had surprising victories against the Romans. 6,000 Romans were killed in the Beit Horon Valley, just outside of Jerusalem. One of the biggest defeats that the Romans ever had in their history. So the Jews were excited, but the Romans were coming back. They started in the north about April of 67, and we are going today to visit one of the main battle sites. My name is Doron Kornbluth. Our trip today will be to Gamla in the southern Golan, perhaps the greatest massacre of that era in the north. But in order to understand Gamla, we have to make a short detour to Yudfat. Yudfat is where Josephus had his last stand, so to speak. And since everything we know about Gamla comes from Josephus, let's take a little trip there. I'm now hiding in a cave in Yudfat. Yudfat played an enormous role in the Great Revolt. It is not so famous, but it should be. Here, perhaps, maybe in this cave or maybe in one like it, was when Josephus turned. What do I mean? Well, who was Josephus? His Hebrew name was Yosef ben Matityahu. He claimed to be of Hasmonean descent, claimed to be a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar. He certainly was part of a priestly family, a family of Kohanim, and a respected one. He was raised wealthy, joined a delegation to Rome when he was only 26 years old, showing that he had some connections, brains, charisma, whatever it was, and came back to the land of Israel incredibly impressed by Rome. In fact, the more radical lower-level commanders in the Mered, in the revolt in the north, distrusted Josephus. He had been appointed by Jerusalem, by more moderate factions, as to be in charge of defenses in the north. He fortified this town, Yudfat. He fortified Gamla and a number of other places. And there were several attempts on his life by Jews, feeling that he was pro-Roman. He wasn't really in it for the fight. Well, they may have been right. It's hard to know. Complex character. Josephus was a prolific writer. He wrote 4 main works that we know. The War of the Jews, which was written in Aramaic and a different version, we think, in Greek. The Greek one survived, where he talked about the entire Roman-Jewish war, made the Romans look pretty good, and made mainstream Jews look okay. Blamed much of it on the Zealots. He wrote a book called The Antiquities of the Jews. Great renown he achieved in the Roman Empire. He's talked about the history of the Jews, which was a respected ancient people even then. He wrote an autobiography, and he wrote a book later in his life called Contra Appion, Against Appion, who was an anti-Semite who had written a book, and Josephus, to his credit, defended Judaism and Klal Yisrael. That being said, with all the writing and all the history, some real questions remain. Josephus is in charge of the north. Yudfat over here is a center point of the battle. The Romans surround and besiege Yudfat for 47 days. An incredible testament to Jewish courage, strength, ingenuity. Vespasian himself, the general, future emperor, is wounded here, and the Romans are mad. And the place is destroyed. Before the Romans come in, though, there is a suicide pact. Roughly 40 men decide to end each other's lives, the commanders, and then the last one will fall on the sword. Does it sound familiar? It could have been taken from Masada. We don't know. Josephus and other ancient historians tended to take stories from all over the place. Only in this story, unlike the Masada one, Josephus, who somehow arranged to be the last one to survive, instead of falling on his sword, surrendered. And in a cave like this is where he turned, impressed the Romans, moved to Rome, came back under Roman patronage, and was witnessing the war from the Roman side. The emperor was a big fan of his, was his patron. He got a Roman name, Flavius Josephus, after the Roman emperor's name. And we have this interesting question. Was he a traitor? Was he honest? Did he know what he was talking about? Some of his descriptions sound very accurate. Some are not accurate at all. Are his numbers reliable? Was he biased? It sounds like he was trying to make his Roman masters quite happy. So whenever we're talking about battles in the north, or the history of the Jews of that era, we always have to remember that in some places, the main, or for instance in Gamla, the only record we have is from Josephus, who himself is a very questionable source. So in 1968, surveys are done all over the land of Israel. A survey is not a dig. They don't know where they're digging yet. It means they're sending people, very often 5 meters apart, walking, looking for remnants of anything old, anything unusual, any structures above ground, half in the ground, pottery shards. Then the archaeologists gather the information, gather what they know about the area, and start to decide where is it worthy to dig, to put in the time and effort to excavate. On one of these expeditions in the north, there was a young volunteer. His name was Yitzhak Gal. He was working with Shmuel Gutman, one of the top Israeli archaeologists. For the first time, a survey of the Golan Heights. We knew Jews were here. We didn't know what was left. David HaMelech married a woman from the Golan. There are ancient communities in the Golan, Bashan and Golan. But we didn't know what was here. So at one point during the survey, Yitzhak Gal takes a break, borrows the Jeep from the community, comes over, and is sitting very much where I'm sitting right now. The fear was over. We've all seen the pictures of the Israeli children being raised in bomb shelters because of the shelling that the Golan Heights, the Syrians, were shelling into Israeli communities down below the Golan Heights. So now we were sitting up here. We had taken the Golan Heights at great sacrifice. And Yitzhak Gal is on a survey looking around, and he looks down, and the story goes, he has a shocked look on his face. His jaw drops. Looks in his bag, says it can't be. Finds the passage of Josephus, 2,000-year-old history that he had grown up on. And listen to what Josephus said. From a lofty mountain there descends a rugged spur, rising in the middle to a hump, so that in form the ridge resembles a camel, whence it derives its name, Gamla, camel. Its sides and face are cleft all around by inaccessible ravines, but at the tall end, where it hangs on the mountain, it is somewhat easier to approach. But this quarter, also the inhabitants, by cutting a trench across it, had rendered it difficult to access. The houses were built against the steep mountain flank and astonishingly huddled together, one on top of the other, and this perpendicular site gave the city the appearance of being suspended in the air and falling headlong upon itself. Yitzhak Gal looked up, had always heard about this ancient town that somehow resembled a camel's hump, and realized that he had found it. Finally arrived at Gamla, we can imagine that they were not in a good mood. The Great Revolt, this small people in Israel had revolted against Roman occupation, the revolt had taken them by surprise. While the revolt had not gone well, there were still pockets of resistance in the north and the south. We can imagine when the Romans came here, they came right here, the bottom of the mountain, looking up at the town of Gamla. Gamla, fortified, strong, and yet not impregnable. The Roman armies were the best in the world. The Roman strategy was the best in the world. So how would Gamla survive? How did they hope to survive? Let's take a moment to try and answer that question. How did the Jews think they could beat the Romans? Vespasian himself was here at Gamla and directed the war at the beginning. His son Titus took over, as we know. Now, I've been in Israel for almost 30 years, but I'm a Canadian originally. And I sometimes think that what would happen, God forbid, if the American army would invade Canada? How long would Canada survive? I know the Canadian army. He's a really nice guy. I mean, great country, but what were the Jews thinking? How could Canada ever beat the States? There's no way. How could the Jews? A few million people maximum. How could we, not the best trained army, how could we beat Rome? What were they thinking in the times of the revolt, or the many other revolts that they had? Well, part of the answer is certainly heavenly. They knew, and they counted on the fact that we would have help from heaven. But they were also thinking practically. And the answer is complex. 60,000 Roman soldiers and auxiliaries came to put down the revolt. It's a lot, but it's not insurmountable. The goal of an asymmetrical war, where you have one power is much bigger than the other power, the smaller power doesn't think that they can actually beat the bigger power in the open field. They don't have the men, they don't have the training, they don't have the arms. They're not aiming to win, they're aiming to make it difficult enough so that the big power will leave. If you want recent examples, think of Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam. Smaller powers, if they play their cards right, can do a lot of damage to bigger powers. Now, this reconstruction of a small Roman catapult, balistra, is kind of cute and quaint. But at the time, and for good reason, it engendered a lot of fear. Each legion had 10 of these things. They could send projectiles at great speeds over 400 meters away. Projectiles could be dozens of kilograms, 50, 100 pounds large, and this was terror. You are now looking at it from the point of view of where the Jews were, as the Romans took over this hill, surrounded Gamla, and began their siege, their attack. Gamla was always considered a relatively safe city, with steep walls on 3 sides and not an easy access on the 4th one. No wonder there was a Jewish community here that felt pretty safe. But when the Romans started their invasion to put down the revolt, Josephus built up fortifications in the north. As a Jewish general, he was actually here in Gamla, and the wall that we see going all the way down, Gamla is of course built on the camel's hump. It's on a mountain, rather steep. The other side is even steeper, can't live there. This is where most of the city was. This stone wall with the round tower we saw before is the wall that was fortified by Josephus in the time when the Romans were on their way, 66, 67 of the Common Era. By the way, the stones here are not like the stones you find in the south of Israel, or in the center, the limestone that they can easily cut and quarry, the Kotel stones. No, this is basalt, volcanic rock, very, very hard. Every time they work with it, it takes forever, takes a lot of strength, which is why it is not built by beautiful, round, carved, framed stones. They didn't have time for that, and the stone is very, very hard to work with for that. So, the Romans come. They have their catapults, they have their men, they have Vespasian. How do they actually get in? Well, the main way is that they think they're going to get in is battering rams. We've all seen pictures of these from movies and history where they have a huge metal front, very often the shape of an animal, ram, and wood pole, and they would just keep hitting. Frightening noise. In front of me, we can actually see what archaeologists believe is the breaching point, the Makom Pirza, the place where the Romans finally broke in. You can see the wall is tall, goes down, it was destroyed in the middle, and the bulk of the Roman troops were finally able to get in to ancient Gamla. We're now at the inside of the breaching point, the place that the Romans finally got into Gamla in 67 of the Common Era. And from this side, there's a wonderful illustration of the preparations that the residents of Gamla and Josephus made as the Romans were approaching. Here you have the original wall of the house. Thick wall, basalt. It served as the wall of the house and also a simple outer wall of the city. Not particularly strong, but it was there. But then they add on a whole other wall. See how thick it is? Making the outside twice as strong, twice as ready for the Roman battering rams. We see how the Jews spent months getting Gamla ready for the assault. They had a chance, but of course we know the end. We're inside one of the homes of ancient Gamla, original, not reconstructed, basalt, a hard volcanic rock. And if you look carefully, you'll see there's an interesting little overhang up there where there's a row of stones that sticks out, known as a corbel. Done on purpose. The roof was laid, that would go all around, the roof was laid on top of it, something like we do with our sukkahs now very often. And the roof would be made of wood and earth, sometimes packed, sometimes just wood, and you can see the remnants of how they lived and the little places that they had for their belongings, for their children, sometimes a wood floor for a second floor. So finding out if an ancient place is Jewish is rather important, actually. And how do you know? Think for yourselves. You're an archaeologist, you're excavating in ancient ruins. True, there were Jews here, but there were also non-Jews here at different times. How do we know what is what? Well, one of the telltale signs in terms of a Second Temple or Talmudic era village or Jewish community is a mikveh. We are now sitting in the mikveh of Gamla. Not the only one, but the main excavated one. Professor Roni Reich from Hebrew University did his PhD and specialized in identifying ancient mikvahs. How do you know it's a mikvah compared to just being a bor mayim, a water cistern? It's a crucial distinction because everyone had to have water in the ancient world, but only one people, one nation, one society, one religion had anything like a mikvah, and that's us. If you positively identify a Jewish ritual bath, a mikvah, you've positively identified this as a Jewish community. So this mikvah is original, not rebuilt, untouched. You can notice the stairs that go down. You can notice the plaster, original plaster on the walls. And the way that we know it's a mikvah is many ways. But one of the main ways, people always say the size. Well, not necessarily. We know a mikvah has to be 40 seah. That's actually not so big. All it is, 40 seah, is technically it's a few hundred liters. We're very careful today. We have over 1,000 liters, but it's not that big. It just has to be enough water for one person to crouch down, right, and go underwater. So this is much bigger than a mikvah needs to be. How do we know it's not a cistern? Well, one of the simplest ways is what I just did. If there are stairs going all the way to the bottom, why did they carve the stairs that way? If it's a water cistern, you just lower a pail. It takes a lot of work to do these. One of the many signs, aside from the location, aside from the size, we are in a Jewish community with a mikvah. Interestingly, identification of Jewish communities was not just on a mikvah, and sometimes different factors. There are a few places we find mezuzah niches. We find ancient shuls. And very often we find ancient shul right beside a mikvah. They would go to the mikvah before praying. One of the telltale signs of a Jewish community is when you have a public room, which identifies a synagogue, and a mikvah outside of it. Positive ID Romans finally made it into Gamla in their second attempt. And one of their main locations that they were eager to conquer was this: the shul, the ancient synagogue of Gamla. If you remember, Gamla was destroyed in the year 67 of the Common Era. That's 3 years before Kornbluth, before the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. Which means that this synagogue, created in the 1st century before the Common Era and destroyed in 67 CE, is one of the oldest synagogues in the world. From the remnants, we can get a glimpse of how glorious it originally was. Hewn basalt, black stones, volcanic, columns with a second floor. The corner pieces are the heart shape that held the 2 rows. The seats all around. I'm now in the round tower that sat atop the fortifications of Gamla. The tower was, of course, originally much taller. The wall goes down and around. And the Romans finally, early in the morning, when no one noticed, were able to get in and open up parts below the tower to cause it to crumble. And it was one of the ways that they finally broke into Gamla. We are now almost at the end of the road, so to speak, of Gamla. For us, but possibly for them as well. According to Josephus, the Romans had massive numbers of troops on each mountain facing steep cliffs. The Romans were attacking and penetrating the city from behind you, from where we've come today, and more Jews, as they were killed and even pushed towards this cliff wall face. We've returned from a wonderful day in Gamla in the Golan Heights, and we've learned a lot. A story of heroism, a battle that we lost. There's a couple more elements that we should mention. Little ideas that I saved for the end. The Battle of Gamla was in Tishrei, the month of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And some say that when the Roman attack failed, because they came in and they fell through the roofs, as Josephus describes. So some suggest that the roofs they fell through were the roofs of our sukkahs, the schach, which the Romans didn't realize were not strong roofs. They were sukkah roofs. In any case, it's a fitting end to the story because the Jews of Gamla were not fighting just for land or for autonomy. They minted coins, the only ones we've ever found, that said on them, for the redemption of Jerusalem. Because the Jews of Gamla knew what they were fighting for.